Today, I'm going to be joined by my co-hosts, Alexandra and Simon Blakely, Alexandra Miller and Simon Blakely from Green Economy North, Rethink Green. And I'll be bringing them in a little bit later to sort of let you hear another voice while you take a break from hearing mine. And also Alexandra and Simon are going to give you a perspective on some elements of carbon accounting, which I think are going to be critical as we move things forward. So my topic is capitalizing on the net zero transition, an opportunity for the Canadian mining sector. I kind of had to read that title a couple of times over to kind of get to a place where I can figure out a way to unpack it. So I want to unpack this in a way that I think is going to close the knowledge gap in a few areas. And I think by the end of the presentation, you know what, hopefully we can get the jury here to turn over and give a good verdict, okay? But before I jump into the presentation, I want to obviously make the very necessary and appropriate land recognition. I am right now in Robinson Huron Treaty territory, and the land on which I am in is the traditional territory of the Atikmasheg Anishinaabe, which is Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. I think one of the most important things to do when you're talking to anybody is to sort of give them an idea as to why you're doing what you're doing, right? So look, I'm in the mining industry because I believe that mining can change the quality of lives of humanity. I believe that mining can elevate the quality of life and standard of living of all current and future humans. So mining, to me, is the existential opportunity. I know there's a lot of talk on existential threats, but mining is the existential opportunity. And I'm hoping that, by the time I'm done talking to you, that I can sort of bring you around to recognizing why that is so. In our industry, the mining sector, we always start off everything we do with a bit of a safety share. And so the safety share I have for you today is get your winter tires, get those studs, if you can afford it, or if you obviously can get access to them. I've been told that tires are in scarcity in Southern Ontario. So, if you would like to get these tires, Sudbury, Ontario has got plenty of them available. The other safety share I wanted to give you is snowshoes. Now, I don't recommend wearing these indoors, but certainly, wearing snowshoes is going to be good for your safety when you're walking around in slippery conditions. So that's my safety share. And this is something that we do traditionally in the mining industry whenever we start doing any kind of presentation. The first thing I want to do is sort of give you a perspective of where I'm coming from in terms of where I work for. And I want to move quickly through about 5 slides talking about the organization I work for before I jump into the conversation at hand. So SEMI, you can say SEMI, you can say KEMI if you want. SEMI was established in 2007, 14-year-old organization, not for profit, governed by a board of directors. Our vision: solve the challenges of the mining industry by making the future happen sooner or tomorrow. Our mission: to advance innovation, and we advance innovation using various techniques. In terms of our location, I think I did mention we're in Sudbury, Ontario, and actually we're located across the street from the new School of Architecture that was built by Laurentian University. In terms of who we service as an ecosystem, we service the entire ecosystem in various ways. Obviously, the mine operating companies, we work with government agencies and departments, we work with academia, both universities and colleges, R&D centers, incubators, accelerators, and we also work with mining associations. There's various of them in Canada. And the most favorite group I work with is the service supply companies. And this is like a huge group of companies that are all sort of pushing the needle forward when it comes to innovation as it goes into the mining sector. This slide here is really to illustrate, the perspective we have on innovation. Research breeds new knowledge. Innovation breeds new business. We're always looking for what we call step change innovation. So innovation that's going to be, disruptive in what it can do for the industry. And in terms of where we sit on the commercialization or innovation value chain, we try and look for technologies that have a little bit of momentum in them. So maybe technology readiness level 4 up to about 8, and we try and move these technologies forward. Just give you some context as to where we exist in the space of innovation and how that moves forward. We sort of use this lens to look at innovation. So we always ask the fundamental question: Does your innovation result in something moving faster, safer, happening sooner in a cheaper way? But also, obviously, we're looking at all those environmental concerns and safety, and also looking at making sure that it is respectful of communities. But when you really look at innovation as a business investment, as an asset, what we do look at is, does innovation decrease capital investment? Does it accelerate time to revenue? Does it improve net present value? Does it improve the bottom line? So we do have a lens that we use to look at innovation. And the last slide on SEMI is really talking about, what does SEMI do in terms of its approach to servicing its clients? So the one thing that we do is go out into the world and we look at innovations. We do innovation scouting. So always looking out at what's happening out there. Innovations come to us or we go and find them. So that's innovation scouting. We also do challenge identification, which really means we go out there and identify where the issues are on the people that are creating the innovations and the people that want the innovations. And then we do the third thing, which is like a dating service. We do the challenge solution matching, so we match these two things together. And then we also do commercialization business services, which are really based on identifying, where an entity is got some weaknesses, and then we try and strengthen those weaknesses, and also we try and take advantage of the opportunities that it has. So it's really more of a business case analysis, and then we find ways to help a company advance what we call past the commercialization valley of death. The commercialization valley of death is a place where good ideas die. So we try and help people to kind of bridge that gap. So that's what SEMI's role is in that area. Now, I don't know if you guys are going to think this is cheesy, but this is my opening statement, okay? Kind of the argument I want to make. And when Elizabeth told me I was going to be speaking to some law students, I thought, you know what? I want to put some little lawyer stuff that I've seen on TV on my presentation, Hopefully, this kind of connects with you guys, hopefully, right? Anyway, so here's my opening statement, okay? Capitalizing on the net zero transition and opportunity for the Canadian mining sector is really, as I said earlier on, an existential opportunity, right? And I believe there's kind of two things here. Either we're going to react and do something about what's coming in the future, or we're going to wait around and then we're going to become victims of the change that is coming. So I want to make a case here is that there is this thing that the industry calls scope 3 emissions, okay? So basically what the industry says is that they are contributions to climate change that are happening through the service and supply sector that services the overall mining industry, and that there's a huge number of companies in this space. And my argument is that, the actual taking advantage of the opportunity for the mining sector is going to happen through the SME. So what I intend to prove is that the current and emerging Canadian small to medium-sized companies, which are between 0 to 499 employees, are best positioned to mobilize the capitalization of this transition, okay? Maybe to put some context into maybe getting you to shift your mindset a little bit, I really want us to be open to this. Be open to the great unknown. Okay, so what is the great unknown? The great unknown is that space that's not known to me and not to you, okay? So I think the future and how we're going to address it is going to come from things like that. So this Johari window is all about uncovering the blind spots in your business. Actually, I think the Johari window itself came from more of the psychologists. We're talking about people solving problems in their lives and really sort of being open to understanding that how you're actually going to solve some problems in the future is not based on what you know. It's based on what you don't know and what others don't know. Okay, so I want to just give us that bit of mindset positioning as we move this conversation forward. So what is the media saying about mining? Okay, this is what media says. Mining is good, mining is bad, mining is dirty, mining is dangerous, but mining is essential. We found out through COVID that mining is actually an essential service. Now, we also know that when we just recently witnessed what's happening at COP26, some people say, stop mining. End call. Okay, yeah, end call for sure. We should end call. Just maybe a side rabbit trail here. Elon Musk, right, wants us to terraform Mars. One way of terraforming Mars is to bring all the coal to Mars and burn it up there, right? Put CO2 in the Martian atmosphere, warm up the atmosphere, right? So that's another option for coal. The news says recycle. Yes, we can recycle. There is quite a volume of minerals and metals that can be recycled. Okay, that can help us to reduce our impact. The media also talks about green mining, right? We talk about responsible mining, talk about traceability of mining, also talk about sustainable mining. So these are some of the things that people are talking about mining, and listen to the context of this conversation. So I want to connect with every single one of you, right? Look, we are here in Canada, honestly, we're very privileged in our own ways. I would be hard pressed that any of you don't have a fridge, and also you don't have a stove, okay? Lights, yeah, you all have electricity, right? And you all have microwaves, you have kettles, TVs, heaters, cars, boats, buses, trains. I mean, the list goes on and on, right? But here's the thing, all these things are dependent on mining, right? So obviously mining is providing every single one of us a certain element of quality of life, right? So now as the world shifts to a net zero economy, we know that there's a huge global population that doesn't have what we have, right? And do we want to deny them fridges and stoves and microwaves and kettles and TVs and phones? No, we don't, right? But the problem is, if everyone's going to have these things, it means that reaching those net zero targets is going to be even more complex. So the reason I'm mentioning this list to you is I want you to connect with the fact that every single human being on this planet has a direct connection to mining. So when we talk about net zero and what capitalizing those opportunities of the mining sector look like, it really involves every single one of us, whether it be indirect or direct. Now let's talk a little bit about the mining ecosystem. So the mining ecosystem, and I think as Melanie and Mark mentioned earlier on, you know that there's people that are called mine operators, right? These big companies that actually do the mining side of things, right? But these mining operators, which is kind of one segment of the mining ecosystem, are serviced by communities. You know, I think you've all heard of things called mining towns. People live in communities that service mining industry. Then there's SMEs and OEMs, service providers, including firms like Dowlings, for example, service mining industry. And then we've got academic institutions, colleges, universities, U of T, Toronto, Western, like all these institutions, Cambridge College. Then there's research entities out there. There's tons of them, Comet Mining, for example. Then there's business investment, there's banks. And I'll talk a little bit about the banks a little bit earlier on because they're playing a bigger role in shifting mining toward that net zero piece. Then there's industry groups. There's a plethora of them in Canada. Then there's government, of course, Natural Resources Canada. I think Melanie and Mark are both from government. Then there's associations, accelerators, incubators, and not-for-profit organizations. So whenever somebody says mining, just remember that there's all these ecosystem stakeholders. And I am going to go a little bit deeper again in breaking out what mining is all about as we move things forward. Again, please have the mindset. What I'm trying to do here is paint a picture, right, of all the different components, and then I'm going to knit them together in how the SMEs are actually the solution to transitioning mining in taking advantage and capitalizing on the net zero transition. So globally, what's going on? There's a couple of organizations that we set up globally to sort of address how the world responds to climate and how the world transitions towards net zero. So one of them is the IPCC, which is created to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change. Another one, which I think is actually a really, really key and big important organization for mining, is the ICMM. And this group is the International Council on Metals, Mining and Metals, and it's an international organization that's dedicated to safe, fair, and sustainable mining and metals industry. Then there's the IEA, which is the International Energy Agency, and then there's the Greenhouse Protocol, which gives an audience on how to measure, manage, and report greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's also the SBTI, which is kind of the science-based targets, and this defines and promotes best practices in science-based target setting. And then we in Canada, we've got three, I would say, really big organizations that sort of look at mining and help to guide mining as we move things forward. There's the CIM, which is the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum. And then we've got the Mining Association of Canada, which is really the industry voice for the Canadian mining industry. And then we've got the PDAC, which is the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. And they represent the interests of Canada, Canadian mineral exploration, and the development industry. Now, something is happening out there, okay, in terms of in the financial industry. So now you've got this surge of things that are called sustainability bonds, impact investors, you've got green bonds, clean tech investing, you've got the carbon credits. And the reason I throw carbon credits here is it is going to become a sort of a currency in a way, right? Because it can be used to sort of help you with some of those offsets, right? So I wanted to throw that out there to say that the financial industry is responding. And I'll talk about the banks a little bit later on how they're responding and how that all kind of knits together. So why does Canada want to achieve net zero anyways, right? So the government says achieving net zero emissions means our economy either emits no greenhouse gas emissions or offsets its emissions, for example, through actions such as tree planting or employing technologies that can capture carbon before it's released into the air. This is essential to keeping the world safe and livable for our kids and grandkids. So why is Canada interested in this? Canada wants to make sure that the future is a livable future for future generations. So this is really impacting every single Canadian at a very personal level. I want to throw out some language that's out there. Okay, so here's the language that's out there. Carbon neutral, people talk about carbon neutral, talk about carbon positive, which means that you're doing more than your part. Okay, carbon neutral means maybe just, sort of meeting the requirements. People talk about offsets, things that are used maybe to offset your emissions. People talk about sequestration, which is all about sort of capturing and storing. Then the societal pressure. So what's happening to societal pressure, especially for mining, is you can't mine anymore in certain areas until we the people say, yeah, you can, right? And then there's carbon goals. People are setting all kinds of goals out there. Then there's the whole idea of reducing emissions. A lot of people are talking about reducing emissions. Then there's science-based targets. People are saying, respect the science, believe the science. Some people don't believe the science. Then there's the whole idea around GHG emissions, carbon reductions, decarbonization. So those are the words that you're hearing out there, right? And I think it'll behoove each and every one of us to at least get a good understanding on what this language means. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is if you really even ask yourself, right? What is your carbon footprint yourself, right? And how does your carbon footprint sort of contribute to how, the industries can reach that net zero? So what has happened with the banks? So big bank pledges. There's something now called the NetZero Banking Alliance, places Canadian financial sector in the center of the multinational movement to promote and advance global climate goals through lending and investing. So why is this important? Well, the reason why it's important and critical is if you're a big mining company or even a small mining company, or if you're a service supply company and you go to the bank seeking financing, if the bank was to ask you, for example, well, what is the carbon impact of the project or that you want us to invest in? And if your answer is something that is negative or contrary to what the bank's image is going to be with society, because remember, the banks serve, I think, if you look at all Canadians, I mean, even on this call, at least all of us have at least one of these accounts, bank accounts. So obviously the banks have realized that, talking about net zero is something fundamental to their client base. So if mines of the future and technology companies of the future are going to access investments and loans, they're going to have to respect the fact that the banks are only going to lend those that can prove that they're actually going to be responsible in how we move things forward. So I've talked to you about the bank pledges. So here's big company pledges, okay? And I'm not going to read all of them, but just pick one. For example, Rio Tinto said 15% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2025, 50% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030. And as you can see from this list here, big mining companies and operators are setting these targets. What we envision seeing happening in the very short term is that even the small service companies are also going to come up with their targets. But here's the problem, or maybe even the opportunity for us. If we are thinking about 2050, and by the way, in 2050, I'm going to be 77 years old in 2050. And in 2050, the technologies and innovations that are actually going to allow us to hit those targets haven't even been invented yet. So the reason why I wanted to bring up that Johari window was to give you the insight that, yeah, we want to reach all these targets, but how we're actually going to get there is actually unknown. And we need to be open to being able to discover what's in that unknown place. Okay, so what's mining doing to sort of position itself to at least admit that it has some challenges that need to get solved? What has happened is the big consulting firms, one of them is KPMG, of course, and I think you're aware of this company. So KPMG has issued out what's called the risks and opportunities for 2021. And they've listed a couple of things here, things like commodity price risk, social license to operate, environmental risk, things like access to capital is going to be a risk. And now if you just start to knit together the story, you get to sort of start to see now the banks are going to be concerned with access to capital for some of these investors. And then you start to realize that social license to operate is going to be tied back to the people. And the fact that all of us use fridges, stoves, microwaves, it's going to be tied back to their community relations. How does mining impact community and community growth? Here's another company, Deloitte. What's Deloitte say? Top issues transforming mining for the future. This is the 2021 challenges. It talks about the world getting serious about decarbonization, again, talking about net zero. It talks about creating an agile supply chain. Now we ask the question, well, is supply chain green? And then we talked about on the road to zero harm, meeting the demand for green and critical minerals. I think Mark and Melanie Riso spoke to that. And here's another company, Ernst & Young. So what's Ernst & Young saying? Ernst & Young is saying pretty much the same story you're hearing from the other consulting companies. So the mining industry recognizes that there's challenges to be solved. And the point I'm trying to get to is that all these challenges that I'm naming so far are actually accelerated in terms of solving them by those small to medium-sized enterprises, which feed their innovations into the global mining supply chain. So what is Canada doing so far? So Canada has gone out there and said, okay, we're going to make an investment in the innovation ecosystem in Canada. So Canada has set out to invest, and I'm just picking very select examples here. Canada is doing a lot. You know, there's a plethora of other institutions that are working together to just bring the innovation ecosystem in Canada to the next level. So one of them is the supercluster initiatives. There's one called the digital supercluster, looking at digital technologies. There's a supercluster called the protein supercluster, protein industry supercluster, looking at agriculture and things like forestry innovations. Another one is advanced manufacturing. And there's a supercluster called Scale AI, and then there's an ocean supercluster. So, but why am I sharing these superclusters with you? Here is why I'm sharing them with you. The innovations that are going to transform the mining industry are coming from these and other sectors of the economy. So these sectors of the economies are actually the economies that are going to pump those new innovations into the mining industry. But when they start to do that, they're going to create opportunities for the mining supply service sector to then create the solutions that allow the industry to transition towards the net zero. So this is why I was sharing them with you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move to introduce the team from Rethink Green, from Green Economy North, just to speak to you. But before I jump into that, I want to introduce them to you more formally. Okay, so I put this up for all of us to read together. Okay, so I want to introduce to you Simon Blakely and Alexandra Miller. So Simon Blakely is Green Economies North Program Director. Simon has 18 years of professional experience in strategic planning, business and economic development with a focus on sustainable development projects. Okay, I'm going to let you guys read the last sentences by yourselves. Alexandra Miller is a Green Economy North Sustainability Officer. In 2020, Alex graduated in a Bachelor of Arts and Science in Sustainability, Science and Society from McGill University, and she's a climate activist. And I've known Alexandra for a long time. In fact, we have a connection through her dad, so you know it's been a great connection. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Simon and Alexandra, who will speak to you for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then when they're done, I'm going to come back and then I'm going to bring us to the second side of our presentation. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let Simon and Alexandra share their screen and take the presentation from here. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, so just while Alex brings up the presentation there, so Alex is going to lead the presentation today, but I'm here really to answer any additional questions that might come and clarify any points that people might raise. So take it away, Alex.
All right, great. Thank you for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you, Charles, for the introduction as well. And as a sustainability officer, essentially what I do is I help with the facilitation of our two programs, Green Economy North and Smart Green Communities. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Before I begin, I would like to take the moment to acknowledge that I am situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation, keepers of the Eastern Door and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Tiotake, the land that many of us call Montreal, has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. And I recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional keepers of the land and waters on which I am honored to present to you all today. And I'm grateful to be able to facilitate connections with you all across Turtle Island. And while I'm talking about that, if you don't happen to know which traditional lands or territories you're joining us from today, I'd like to recommend the nativeland.ca as a great resource. It's a website that features a map of all the territories and languages and treaties across the land that many of us refer to as Canada. And if you feel comfortable, you can drop them in the chat or use this resource in your lives and careers moving forward. So to give you a little context about Green Economy North, the program I'm going to tell you about today, we realize that businesses, communities, and households across Canada and around the world find themselves in a pivotal moment of climate change right now. Global greenhouse gas emissions are generally understood to have plateaued during 2020, despite the lockdowns. And some scientists already warn that they may have risen again in 2021. So according to some reports, in at least 18 of the world's most significant economies, a lot of the pandemic rescue strategies that have dominated spending have harmful environmental impacts. And this includes bailouts for oil and new high carbon infrastructure. And this greatly outweighs the positive benefits of spending on green initiatives. And so as we take steps to, build back better and pursue more sustainable ways to support our economic recovery from COVID, decision makers, stakeholders, and citizens around the world are actively researching, developing, and implementing projects to help us both mitigate and adapt to the predicted effects of climate change. So I'm sure you've all heard, in the news, COP26 in Glasgow, and it's widely understood as a momentous kind of make or break moment for us all. The pledges, targets, and goals and investments made in Glasgow could ultimately decide our fate as a human species. And we now have approaching 28 years left to decarbonize our world. Most experts agree, given the severity of the problem we face, the overarching desire to keep the global average increase in temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. There's also a need to establish interim targets, with many countries now signaling interim GHG reductions for 2030. And with the 2020s now being touted as the decade of action on climate change, global leaders have now also agreed to reconvene annually as opposed to every 5 years. So we're going to see them again at COP27 next year in Egypt, which is great news. Now, achieving these targets will not completely remove hydrocarbons from our means of economic production, but will require a combination of enhanced energy efficiencies, including energy retrofits and new builds, shaped by strengthened legislation, regulations, and funding-based supports. Substitute fuel and energy sources, including the accelerated uptake of renewable and smart sensor-based technologies, and integrated waste diversion and management systems like repairing, restoring, recycling, and reusing the abundant products and materials that we already have in circulation. And then also implementing nature-based solutions, guided by the practices and principles of circularity, regenerative design, and biomimicry, which is replicating nature's own systems. Now, what does this mean for the mining industry? Well, broadly, it means to mitigate climate change and its impacts centered around decarbonization, which Charles already kind of talked about in terms of language around mining industry and sustainability. And thanks to Charles' great presentation thus far, we've briefly highlighted some of the companies within the mining ecosystem that have made such commitments to date. In fact, many mining companies and heavy industry firms around the world are jumping on the bandwagon and committing to low carbon emissions, with some planning to reduce emissions by a certain percentage by a particular date, like Charles just mentioned with Rio Tinto. Others are looking to achieve carbon neutrality, and a small number are also aiming for net zero by 2050, which is all in line with our Paris Agreement to limiting global warming to 1.5. Now, whether the reasons for it are rooted in environmental stewardship or because of the rising demand for improved environmental, social, and governance performance from investors, governments, and citizens, the truth is mining and metal executives around the world are now catching on. And according to PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP's 2021 CEO survey, 76% said that they were concerned about climate change and environmental damage, which is actually up, surprisingly, by 57% just last year. And furthermore, that same survey also found that 70% of those executives are now planning to increase their long-term investments in sustainability and ESG initiatives. So Charles walked us through the ecosystem a little bit just now, which means I can dive right into what net zero in mining throughout the ecosystem and across the supply chain really means. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol breaks down emissions down into 3 scopes. We've got scope 1, which includes direct emissions arising from a mining company's own operations. Scope 2 includes the indirect emissions that a mining company purchases, like electricity, for example. And then scope 3 includes all the other indirect emissions along the value chain. And this not only includes like end users, but also emissions from small to medium-sized tech and product suppliers who mining companies rely on to perform their operations. Generally, most targets established up until now cover scopes 1 and 2 almost exclusively, and meaning that emissions arising from scope 3 activities are sometimes a bit of a blind spot for the mining industry. And that's actually refers back to Charles's Johari window. And this is now where our focus lies. Setting targets for scope 3 is particularly challenging for mining companies because they are essentially, somebody else's emissions. And methods to set those targets include input-output modeling, life cycle assessments, and gathering information from suppliers and end users. But even though there's no shortage of efforts from suppliers who come forward saying, that they want to partner and figure out how to reduce emissions together, those efforts are often stifled by either the absence of a single accepted method of measurement for those emissions or a lack of information from suppliers within that supply chain. For example, very recently, Sunil Kumar, the Energy Strategy Director at Kinross Gold, brought this issue up recently at the Energy and Mines Virtual World Congress. And he said that one of the challenges we find in some areas, especially with chemical and material inputs, is as we reach out to our suppliers and ask them what their emission intensity factors are, until recently, a lot of them just didn't have that information themselves. And the quote continues saying something like, I think that we're seeing now that they're trying to understand it and start providing numbers, but in a lot of cases, they're finding that the upstream suppliers didn't have that information themselves in terms of what their emission factors were. And so that's where Green Economy North can help. So what we do, I'll tell you a little bit, we were established in 2016, and it remains the only membership-based sustainable business program in Northern Ontario. We equip businesses, non-for-profits, and the broader public sector with knowledge, information, and tools that they need to pivot and succeed in the green economy. And this includes those SMEs that play a large role in the innovation ecosystem for the mining industry. And in the context of measuring scope 3 emissions, we offer affordable and tailored support to help those businesses set and meet their emission reduction targets so that they can participate in these reporting efforts for scope 3. As a program, we deliver technical advisory and research-based programming. We organize and deliver business and community-oriented events. We encourage knowledge sharing and collaboration among the virtual networks that we facilitate, and we recognize and celebrate that progress that they make all along the way. And I'll walk you through those milestones a little bit as well. But in regard to tackling scope 3 emission reductions, a key component of the program, which is especially critical in solving scope 3 emission challenges, is the technical supports that we offer those members when estimating their existing annual GHG emissions across different energy sources and scopes. Once the impact of a business or organization has been quantified as a carbon dioxide equivalent measurement, we delve deeper and assist our members in producing action plans and setting targets to both quantify and reduce their emissions and achieve real cost savings. So working with our partners, which includes program members, different levels of government, academia, utility companies, community groups, and other stakeholders, including SEMI, we are leading the conversation and shifting, supporting the shift towards a more sustainable means of mining. Green Economy North is a hub of a wider Green Economy Canada network. And the wider network, the hubs share best practice case studies and other information to support our members as they make progress with their sustainability goals. And the network actually has quite a far reach, which currently extends from Edmonton to New Brunswick, and from London, where I assume most of you are, to Ottawa. And so to date, so far, we've engaged across the country over 300 businesses to set more than 70 targets and secured commitments to reduce more than 200,000 tons of GHGs. And together, we're demonstrating that this sustainable economy is possible. And how we do this as a designated hub is we guide them through a milestone process. Starting in January of 2022, we're introducing a cohort-based model where businesses and organizations can benefit from a series of collaborative opportunities to learn from each other, and as we collectively set and achieve greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And this includes stage 1 is to get engaged. We have a kickoff meeting and get to know the network. We talk data, emission scope, sources, and we take the necessary first steps. And by keeping our fingers on the pulse, we're equipped to share up-to-date knowledge, information, and resources with members. And this stage is really all about empowering and enabling these stakeholders to understand their own footprint, because as of right now, those small to medium supplier companies that Charles was talking about are quite underserviced. And this includes, we bring guest speakers, we share industry specific examples, and we attend conferences and summarize that research for our members. And we give them up-to-date relevant information in terms of opportunities for them. Then we do this baseline energy walkthrough and produce GHG emission inventories report using our impact tracking tool. And members share their utility bills, and this information is referenced to really understand where there's room for additional improvement, and recommendations are then communicated with those members. And then we offer support to mobilize their green teams, as we call them, and we outline their emission reduction goals and pathways, creating achievable action plans and setting ambitious reduction targets. And then, of course, it would be, if you don't take a picture, it never happened, right? So we recognize our members' success through media releases and shout outs, and we just have a big old party at our sustainability awards, and give everybody the well-deserved pats on the backs that we all kind of want every now and then. We're doing hard work. And I would take an opportunity, we do kind of do the same program for on a municipal, township, First Nations community level, where we kind of guide them along the same milestone progress through a membership-based program. And again, we equip them with this knowledge and information and tools to address specific challenges within their jurisdictions and achieve their sustainable development goals. I know I don't want to keep too much time, but we do kind of help them with we can kind of take action for these businesses, organizations, and communities in various different ways. And that can include sort of reducing our total energy demands through greater efficiencies, adopting alternative technologies, evaluating the effectiveness of existing commercial equipment, appliances, and fleets, and introduction of adaptive low impact development solutions. And usually this is the part where I would pitch to you all to become members, but knowing that, maybe, well, if you perhaps have friends, families, or peers who might be interested, I'd encourage you to pass it along. But otherwise, I will send this over to our next slide, which has my contact information along with Simon Blakely, who's on the call. He's the program director. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, but I can hand it back to Charles, and maybe we can do questions at the end so that we don't take up too much time. Anyways, I'll stop sharing.
Right, thank you very much, Alex. While I'm queuing up my slides, I do want to say that, someone else's scope 3 is someone else's scope 1, right? And when you look at the whole mining sort of value chain, which I'm going to show you next, you get to realize that mining is actually, a collection of the scope 3 emitters, all joined together to create these things called mining companies, right? So effectively, if we can narrow in on where the emissions are being produced on those called the scope 3s, we can effectively regreen the entire industry. But I really want to sort of show you, an expanded view of what mining is. In the mining industry, we always say that non-mining people think mining is a hole in the ground. They think, yeah, it's a big hole in the ground, it's a big shaft. That's what mining is, right? And I think the average Canadian would possibly maybe say that about mining, that's a hole in the ground. But here's an expanded view of what mining is all about. So prospecting, what is prospecting? And I'll go through this quickly. Prospecting is you're walking around in the bush somewhere, you find an outcrop, you think there's a potential of a mine there, and then you shift over to exploration. Exploration is where you take maybe some samples, take a closer look at what's in the ground, so you can analyze it a little bit better. Once you sort of figure out that you've got something that is potentially mineable, you then go into the whole financing and permitting piece, right? And then you go to design, okay? And then you go to construction, production, operations. And under operations, you go to extraction, or that's where people think mining is all about, right? And then you got mineral processing, and then you got tailings, and then you got mine closure, then you got rehabilitation, restoration, and repurposing. On the repurposing side, some companies are thinking that, hydroponics can maybe be done underground in a different way. So people are using some underground mining cavities as production facilities for vegetation. People are using abandoned mine sites for capturing energy, storage of energy, compressed air storage. So the reason why I want to put this slide up and stay on it for a little bit is this, to say this to you. Within each of these boxes is ecosystems comprising of supply and service sector companies. all those companies are the companies that are being labeled as Scope 3 emitters. So if we truly want to green the planet and then green mining, we have to get all those individual ecosystem companies that are within these boxes to also green themselves. But as they become green, they allow mining to mine in a more effective and green way, which then allows us to actually reach those 2050 targets. So it's all sort of connected in that way. I wanted to show you some examples of some companies that are doing amazing work in terms of pushing the innovation continue forward for mining. You've got Electrolyte Innovation, 2S Water, companies like Ideon who are using things like muon topography. 2S Water is a real-time sensors for measuring dissolved elements in solution in real time. Electrolyte Innovation has an amazing technology called an hydraulic air compressor, which is a natural way of producing clean, sustainable compressed air. Another company is Rhino Technologies has a materials movement technology, which is amazing. Nova Mera has a technology for mining from the surface. So you don't have to go underground anymore. You can mine right from the surface, which is really good for the environment, business footprint. Companies like Rosa, who have unmanned aerial survey equipment, drone technology, which is allowing us to push the envelope when it comes to exploration. Companies like Hyperion, which are allowing us to optimize energy utilization, especially when it comes to power cabling. And then, I mean, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but these are just some examples of some companies who are pushing the envelope forward when it comes to mining. So what I want to do now is I want to give you an example of a grouping that has come together to form a network, which I think is going to be critical in moving things forward. And that grouping is what we call the Mining Innovation Commercialization Accelerator Network. This is something that SEMI has sort of spearheaded and moved forward. And really what we are doing here is we're saying Canada as a nation has innovations coming out of so many different areas. How do we bring all the innovations so that it can help the mining industry? So what we have is an opportunity where we have a program that was funded by the government of Canada for $40 million over 5 years, leveraging it about $112 million, 6 main partners across Canada from BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, Quebec, and Newfoundland, and also addressing what's happening in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and the Nunavut. So what we're effectively doing here is we're harnessing Canada's innovation capabilities to address how mining can actually move towards being clean and green, which translates to how mining can actually end up hitting those net zero targets that we're setting. So this MICA network is a vision to connect regional mining clusters to cross-sector innovation centers across the country, to create a national network to commercialize innovations into the mining industry and use the Canadian advantage of SME-based innovations to create a national mining technology ecosystem. Again, looking at those clean technologies. With a vision to build a national ecosystem as a network of collaborative regional networks, again, collaboration and the collective power, bringing that together, accelerating the number and scale of Canadian SMEs engaged in mining, which means bringing non-mining innovations to help mining to move forward, commercializing new late-stage high-impact mining technologies, and again, helping SMEs attract investment for scale-up to participating in the global supply chains, and also including increasing domestic and export sales. Okay, talked about the vision. So in terms of the technology, in terms of the mission-specific components, I want to just highlight build, accelerate, create, commercialize, and attract is what we're aiming to do. Again, I spoke to you earlier on about the mining ecosystem. So this network is again trying to connect the mining ecosystem in a way that is inclusive of all the different partners that are playing in advancing mining forward. The technology areas we're looking to focus on, again, productivity, energy, smart environment. Now, if you link back this conversation to what Alex was talking about in terms of being able to measure the impact and intensity of carbon in SMEs, link back to what Deloitte, Ernst & Young are saying and KPMG about mining, and then link all that back to the fact that mining wants to drive towards net zero. You'll see that these areas, this productivity, energy, smart, and environment are the areas where technology are going to be developed. Now, here's an exhaustive list of what potential technology areas can be addressed under productivity. I'm not going to read all this, but just maybe pick a couple of them. smaller, faster, and more effective equipment, greener equipment, more efficient on the technology side, things like, directional drilling, and I think I'm getting a little bit too specific here, but machines like mechanical rock excavating machinery. So there's all these areas under productivity that need companies to actually do something about it. And so as mining starts to sort of break down its different components and start to green these different components, what you see happening is that it actually means a rise in the number of companies that are going to be servicing the industry. Here's another area, energy. Again, a plethora of opportunities for startups to rise up and take advantage of solving this problem. Again, solving these challenges, addressing these opportunities is moving mining towards that net zero piece. Another area is environment. Okay, again, we've got technologies that are required to make sure that mining is performing in an environmentally sound way that allows mining to get the level of societal acceptance so that mining can happen even in our own backyards. And then the other area is smart, anything smart, digital. And I think we're seeing a lot more of this, especially since the COVID pandemic. There's been a lot of surgence of using digital technology. Look at us here. I think we're all more comfortable with Zoom now. I think, when Zoom first started, people, didn't even really understand Zoom etiquette. Now people have got better Zoom etiquette, right? And so this technology is now mainstream. I mean, my kids are using Zoom. People are using VR glasses, put on the Microsoft Oculus, play ping pong with a robot, for example. That's already sort of, becoming mainstream. So, but what it means though, is that these technologies are all driving mining towards being net zero, right? But these technologies are being created within the service and supply sector, which is servicing the mining industry, allowing the mining industry to mine those minerals and metals in a way that is green, allowing us to reach our low carbon economy targets. So the next slide here is really more like a dump, okay, of the different things that I think are coming in the future. And I'm going to touch on a couple of them. So what's coming in the future? Number one, as we're talking about the Johari window, that there is yet to be invented solutions that are coming our way, right? There is a potential that there'll be no more surface mining. So no more hole in the ground conversation, right? The breakup of big companies into smaller ones, climate certification, and I think things that Alex and Simon are working on. Maybe a day is going to come when people are going to ask the question, show us your carbon impact so that before I do business with you, I want to know what your carbon impact is, right? Then there's the traceability of resources that's coming along soon. Ethically sourced services. People want to know that, that you're not using unethical mechanisms to produce your services. Ethically extracted resources. We don't want children mining. We don't want people touching mercury with their hands. And what's also coming is your neighborhood is sustained by mining. Your neighbor. So nowadays, this was really interesting. A person can now live in a condo in Toronto and technically operate a mining equipment located somewhere else. So mining is coming to your neighborhood. It's coming to your neighborhood. Whereas before, people always viewed mining as happening somewhere else, right? So now my mining and its support is coming right to our neighborhoods. And then there are also things that's happening is that shorter permitting timelines. I don't know if you know this, but it takes about a decade from the time when you find a new resource to when it actually becomes a new mine. So, but because of technology and because of better ways of doing mining, greener ways of doing mining, we're going to shorten those timeframes. So as mining drives towards net zero, it's going to have the right kinds of technologies that allow these things to happen. The other thing that's happening in mining is the public image is changing. There was a time when people didn't really care much about what mining was all about. In fact, people were just shouting, shut down mining. But now environmentalists are starting to realize and embrace that mining is actually essential to the future. Without mining, we would not be able to be on this Zoom call right now. So just think about that really hard. Like everything about mining has brought this call to even happen. Zero emission mine, zero carbon tools are coming along. Recycling, we're not taking advantage of recycling enough. Hydrogen steel, waste heat recovery, energy efficiency, things like fuel switching, low carbon power, things like automation, process optimization. All these things I'm naming here are just screaming opportunity for the mining supply service sector companies. Those SMEs I mentioned, who are going to be critical in bringing mining to the next level, are going to be the ones producing all the services and supplies necessary to move the technology forward. Okay, I'm going to get cheesy once more. The jury, here's the closing argument, okay? We've spoken about this. Again, I think maybe I watched too many movies. The innovations applicable to the mining supply chain coming from the SMEs are positioned to best catalyze the benefits associated with the net zero transition. We need to build the capacity of the SMEs in order for mining to truly take advantage of the net zero transition. Green industrial revolution is what is needed, which would decarbonize virtually every single sector of the economy. And it's something that Bill Gates said. So at the end of the day, the opportunity to truly take advantage of this transition towards a net zero economy means that we have to infuse the supply service companies in Canada so that they can give us the benefits that mining is looking to achieve. And with that, I'm going to end the presentation. And again, thank you to Alex. Thank you to Simon for your presentation. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to have this conversation.